The desperate plight of Western civilization is revealed in increasingly simple, profound, even elemental ways. The fires in Los Angeles and the surrounding LA County have been burning since the start of the year. By now, 25 people are dead, around 10,000 structures have been destroyed, and over 200,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. The cost runs into the billions of dollars, multiple billions. There are still 5 active fires covering huge areas. It's easy to see how and why, for many in the thick of it or looking on at it, the conflagration has something biblical about it. According to investigative reporter Mike Schellenberger, the certainty that fire was coming in the weeks before the first of the 5 broke out was undeniable. The hot, dry Santa Ana winds had come early. Untended overgrowth had led to a build-up of combustible material, much of it touching electrical wires. The natural signs, the warnings, were plain to see for anyone actually looking. Coupled to those conditions was the presence of tens of thousands of homeless people in LA County, a neglectful disgrace in itself, and the presence among that huge group, many of them camping out in the wild, of those addicted to the drug methamphetamine, a group with a known and acknowledged propensity for starting fires as part of a destructive nihilistic subculture. According to Schellenberger, all of this is so well known as to have long been taken for granted by locals. Fires were coming and everyone knew it. It was only a matter of when. Despite the looming threat, LA Mayor Karen Bass, who campaigned in 2021 on a promise that she would not travel internationally if elected, was thousands of miles away in Ghana when the deadly Palisades and Eaton fires broke out. The Ghana trip was her 5th out of the country since her election, and she has also been loudly slammed for having overseen the cutting of millions of dollars from LA's firefighting budget. Under her watch and that of Governor important reservoir called Santa Ynez, close by the Palisades fire, had been left empty of water for over a year, severely limiting the firefighters' ability to tackle the blaze. The madness, bordering on what I would describe as the deliberate indulgence of lethally dangerous anti-human stupidity, is all over this story.
You may have seen there's a clip that went viral on social media with the deputy fire chief of Los Angeles, where she's sort of saying, oh yeah, people ask me, can you carry my husband out of a house, in danger? And she's like, well, your husband got himself in a place that he shouldn't have been. That was her response. It was like,
I saw that video, and my first thought was that can't be. Was that real?
I know, it looks like a parody. It's crazy. You're like, yeah, that's literally your job, is to be able to carry someone. Can you imagine like someone being like, oh yeah, your elderly father, we couldn't carry him out of the house, and he shouldn't have been in that house when it was burning down. Or your daughter
gets raped walking to school.
Yeah.
Well, she shouldn't have been wearing a skirt.
Right.
And so now, a citadel of the elite, the city of dreams, home of Hollywood, there at last, the wealthiest of people, many espousing or at least comfortable with an ideology built around self-loathing, which is to say white people loathing their whiteness on account of its association with so-called privilege. There, as the wider world watches, the place is consumed in flames as though a biblical parable was being made manifest before our eyes. Talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. I say above all that this is where Marxism gets you. Remember how George Orwell wrote that socialists don't give a damn about the poor, that they just hate the rich. It's about envy, it's about resentment, and it's infected Western civilization for so long now that its latest symptom is absolute self-loathing among the elites themselves. Then there's the warning that goes along the lines of from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The idea there is that the first generation are builders who create with sweat and tears. They then pass on an inheritance to the second generation that witnessed the hard work and so endeavours to maintain and grow what was built. Then comes the third generation, born into wealth and assuming that life is only and always easy, that squanders all that's been handed to them by their forefathers. And with all of that in mind, up to and including those fires in LA, I say what we're seeing now is nothing less than the collapse of Western civilization a collapse enabled and even desired by a generation of spoiled brats. Schellenberger calls it nihilism, a culture and an ideology of nihilism by those who have learned to believe in nothing, to have no loyalty to the past, present or future, those who have too an impulse to destroy everything they have learned to take for granted, if not to out and out despise. As I say, it's also where you get when you abandon the truth. Hollywood is the modern home of fantasy, and now that county is ablaze. The neglect of what's real and what matters, like the necessity to keep reservoirs filled with water, the necessity to keep flammable tinder under control in the face of the ever-present threat of fire, leads to disaster. Other disaster comes from abandoning the truth that men cannot be women and women cannot be men, not ever. Other disaster comes from sexualising children, drag queen story time, naked men parading in the street in front of toddlers. Call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, I no longer care. I connect these dots because a bigger picture seems increasingly obvious. It's a bigger picture drawn for us by an anti-human, nihilistic cult, and that cult thinks it's in the end game now, which is to say ending Western civilization, arguably for no other reason than because it can and so will. I'm hardly new to thoughts of the collapse of culture being all around us. Here is academic, critic and feminist Camille Paglia.
So the movement toward androgyny occurs in late phases of culture, okay, as a civilization is starting to unravel, okay, and that you can find it again and again and again through history in the Greek art, okay, you can see it happening. All of a sudden, okay, there's a kind of the sculptures of handsome nude young men athletes that used to be very robust, okay, in the archaic period suddenly began to seem like wet noodles, okay, toward the end. Okay? And that the people who live in such periods, a late phase of culture, whether it's the Hellenistic era, whether it's the Roman Empire, whether it's the mauve decade of Oscar Wilde in the 1890s, whether it's Weimar Germany, people who live at such times, okay, feel that they're very sophisticated, they're very cosmopolitan, okay, and homosexuality, heterosexuality, so what, anything goes, and so on, all right, but from the perspective of historical distance, okay, you can see that it's a culture that no longer believes in itself, okay, and then what you invariably get are people who are convinced of the power of heroic masculinity, okay, on the edges, whether they're the Vandals and the Huns, okay, or whether they're the barbarians of ISIS, okay, you see them, starting to mass on the outsides of the culture, and that's what we have right now. That there is a tremendous and rather terrifying disconnect between the infatuation with the transgender movement in our own culture and what's going on out there, okay, all right? And so I mean, that's why I'm concerned. I feel it's ominous.
It's vitally important, I think, to know that this kind of cyclical rise and then fall of civilization happens over and over again. What's galling to us, or should be, is that while the elites, so-called, may be jaded and tired of so much plenty, lives in which everything their little hearts might desire comes to them so easily, the rest of us have lives altogether different. We have never yet even tasted, let alone grown tired of, the privileges and excess they have learned to despise. The elites might be suffering the crippling disability of affluence, but we are not. And while those nihilistic death cultists would like to throw it all away just for a moment of decadent distraction, the rest of us, the billions, still have hopes and dreams. The modern Greek poet C.P. Cavafy imagined the people of a city of the classical world, Alexandria maybe, who believe a horde of barbarians is advancing upon their gates. The idea is actually exciting, something new, a violent, destructive end to the boredom of peace and plenty. But then word reaches them that the barbarians have gone elsewhere. The barbarians are no longer coming. Quote, "Now what's going to happen to us without barbarians?" they ask. Those people were a kind of solution. I say this is where we are now, governed by a death cult that would see the whole of Western civilization burn to the ground so they could preside over the ashes. Lies have replaced truth. The likes of the scamdemic, of the COVID-19 that never was, The climate crisis, that's another hoax. The ideology that men can be women, that children should be all about sex too. Acceptance of this kind of empty, ugly nonsense is the undoing of Western civilization. The fires in Los Angeles should make everyone see it.